Hello, I'm Dr. Roush, and in this video I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. Now, you can probably tell already from my accent that I'm not originally from South Carolina. I'm a native Hoosier. I'm someone from Indiana. But even though the accent is different, I can tell you that the life is very similar in many ways. Small town Indiana, small town South Carolina are very similar, and I really like being here in small town South Carolina. But growing up in a small town, I was very interested in the wider world. I was just very curious what was beyond my town, what was beyond my state. And when I was in college, I was fortunate enough to make friends with people from lots of different countries. And in particular, I made a lot of friends from Korea. And I got to be very close friends with a lot of people from Korea, was able to visit Korea, and became very, very interested in the history of Korea. And so when I do research, when I publish, it's usually in that area of Korea. And my second language, or I like to say I'm not bilingual. I'm kind of 1.5 lingual. I'm kind of I can speak some Korean, and my reading's better than my speaking, but that's my language other than English that I use sometimes. Now, a lot of people who are interested in Korea today are interested in K-pop like BTS and things like that. But what I was interested in when I studied Korean history was was curious about its religious history in particular. One thing that's interesting about Korea, unfortunately I shouldn't say unfortunately. Basically, what happened was in the late 18th century, Koreans brought Christianity into their country, particularly Catholicism, and that's pretty rare. Usually, missionaries go to a country bringing religion, but Koreans actually went out and brought it to themselves, which is interesting in and of itself. But unfortunately, then the government did not like that and killed a large number of Koreans, Catholics, Korean Christians. And I was very curious about that history, and so I wanted to study that. And I went to study Korea in Canada, right? Why did I go to Canada? Because this man, Professor Don Baker, is a professor at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada, and specializes in this history of Korean Catholicism, especially looking at the persecutions, right? Why would the government in the 19th century in Korea kill people simply because they were Christians? And that's, in fact, what happened. And then later on, I helped him write a book on that subject. He wrote most of the book. That's why his name is bigger than mine. So I think it's kind of funny. I went to Canada to study Korea, but that's what ended up happening. And I continued those relationships not simply with Korea as a country and its history, but also with Korean people. And these are Korean students who were all also students at Lander University. Right. This is at the Chick-fil-A in Greenwood, and this is actually in Korea. And these were our friendship family, sons and daughters. So for me, this relationship with Korea isn't just something I study. It's also on a personal level. Now, what's funny, though, people, when they see my wife, and this is my wife here, and of course, these are our kids, and these are our kids when they were younger. When people see her, they sometimes think she's Korean because it kind of, you would guess that, right? But she's actually Filipino. And this is a picture of us at Patriots Point, and she's proudly pointing up at the USS Leyte because she's a Latino, meaning she's from Southern Leyte, which, if you're interested in history, that's the place where both Magellan and Douglas MacArthur would land. So it's funny, I like to joke I'm an American who studied Korea in Canada, married to a Filipino. So I was really wanting to go out and see the world as much as possible. But even though I'm interested in world history, and I teach a lot of courses related to this, I teach courses on Korean history, Chinese history, Japanese history. I teach courses on religion and warfare. There's something I'm missing there. Was that the big ones? Oh, and I teach a history of comics and anime class. I'll come back to that. But I also am interested in American history, and that's one reason we're there at Patriots Point, to go look at the museum and the aircraft carrier there. But I also teach U.S. history somewhat, but I usually teach it in what the form is called public history. And public history is when you're teaching history outside the classroom. So one thing I do as part of my job and part of half job, half fun is I volunteer at 96. That's me there dressed up as an American Revolutionary soldier. And we're preparing to fire this little cannon called a swivel gun. It's light enough that you could actually pick it up and carry it around, and that's us firing it. And we do that as a demonstration for an audience to teach them about the American Revolution and the battle that was fought, or the battles that were fought at 96. So that's teaching outside the classroom. And as part of that, I also teach what are called public history classes, teaching people how to work at a museum, how to work at a national park site, things like that. And there you can see a field trip. This is what I took one of my public history classes to go visit the Benjamin Mays Historical Site. If you don't know Dr. Benjamin Mays, he was the mentor of Dr. Martin Luther King. And he is in fact from Greenwood County, and his the historic site dedicated to him is only a couple miles from the Lander campus. I do hope you'll visit if you have not done so already. You can always go again. And there's our class visiting. That's Reverend Chris Thomas. He's in charge of that public history site dedicated to Dr. Mays. There's our same group inside with him giving us a talk again about Dr. Mays. So one thing, so that's a little bit about me, about the classes I teach, about who I am as a professor. Sometimes students are interested in what a professor's personal life is like. You know, what are you like when you're not when you're not a teacher? So two things I like to do for fun that you may not guess from what you've heard, what I've said so far. I really like horror. Right? Like I like scary movies, scary books, scary stories, things like that. I don't like slasher ones. I don't like violence. I like ghost stories. I like things that are surreal. So for example, this is Junji Ito. He's a famous manga horror artist. So he's a Japanese comic artist, and he has a lot of very interesting horror comics. And so for example, in one, he talks about a town that is haunted not by a ghost, but by a shape, by a spiral. Right. And it's interesting. His stories are kind of slow burn. Like it starts off with just this young lady, you know, it looks like kind of a normal picture, but eventually you notice that her hair is behaving very strangely. And as the story goes on, this is what her hair starts doing. This woman's hair starts doing this, and they get into a hair fight. It's kind of surreal, but also kind of funny and kind of scary at the same time. That's Junji Ito's style. So that's one thing. One other thing about me that is that I like to play role-playing games. I play every couple weeks or so online with my college buddies. We play Mutants and Masterminds, which is like a superhero game, and we play things like Dungeons and Dragons, Ravenloft in particular, which is a horror-oriented game. So now you know something about me. I look forward to working with you in this class and getting to know something about you.